So I'm actually a miniature Viking. As you'll see later on my last slide, when I was in Second Life, I was known as Cal Viking, a really big, ferocious Viking. So it's great to be here. It's my first Nordic VR forum, hopefully not the last. So if I do well, maybe they'll invite me back. I'm particularly pleased to be here to talk about educational technology in education, learning, and training, which I've had a passion for many years, and particularly now to talk about XR and whether and how that can shake up how we think about education and learning and training and how we do education and learning and training. So, since most of you don't know, oh, there I need this one. I'm glad it's only 2 buttons, next and back. Most of you don't know who I am, so I thought I would take one slide, and this summarizes 40 years of professional experience in the years that I've been really in the Valley. I am a transplanted Norwegian, and actually this is like homecoming for me. Although I'm not from Hamar, I'm from Lillestrøm, not too far down on the way to Oslo. So I decided to go over to the Valley. It was a little warmer, and it's been a wonderful place to be. And for the first 20 years of my career, I did work as a regular economist. And then the next 20 years, I was a recovering economist. Focusing more on entrepreneurship, technology, innovation, and if I could be somewhere in here, I was really happy. So I started at SRI, formerly Stanford Research Institute in Menlo Park. For all the techies in here, I'm sure you're familiar with what Doug Engelbart did and all the great work that that man and many others did at SRI. We were kind of the original think tank in the Valley. So I was very pleased to start there in 1979 and have a front row seat at the development of the Valley. And then after 20 years, my group in SRI spun itself out. We became our own little company inside SRI. We felt we wanted to run our own show. And then the last 10 years, I've been doing a lot of work with Silicon Vikings, which is a professional networking organization, kind of creating innovation bridges between the Baltics and the Nordics and Silicon Valley. So there are 4 of us on the executive committee, and we have a total of about 150 years of experience in the Valley. So we use that to help and assist Nordics and Baltics in the Valley. So I got introduced into immersive worlds. How many were involved in Second Life 10 years ago? Quite a few of you. Yeah, maybe I met you then as Cal Viking. Everyone knew me as Cal Viking. And it was fun. It was really cool. And of course, everyone thought that was going to take over the world. Sweden had an embassy in Second Life and this and that. Didn't quite happen, but then I got into EdTech, and I'll talk a little more about EdTech. And then the last year, I've done this study on AR/VR in the Nordics and the Baltics, education, learning, and training. And I'm going to summarize some of the highlights from that report in my presentation, and then put that in a bigger context. If you want the report, you can find it here for free, of course, so you can get some more detail. But I think it is instructive as we look at the future and the evolution of XR in education and learning to look at what happened in EdTech. And I have spent the last 10 years focusing mostly on EdTech before I did this report on XR. And it's really interesting and impressive, I think, in the last 5 years, the things that have happened when you look across the Nordics and the Baltics. Started with EdTech Sweden, which is now a trade association, and Janne Jeppesen has been leading that work. Finland now has a similar trade association connected with the accelerator XR-Edu that Antti runs. Oslo and Hege has been doing a wonderful job in Oslo. They are heading in the same direction, and now EdTech Denmark. So there are all kinds of things happening in addition to N8, which is a Nordic 5 and the Baltics 3. So N8, that's an organization of executives at EdTech companies that collaborate. So the key is collaboration across borders. This is something I've been evangelizing about since I started doing EdTech about 10 years ago and looking at the Nordics and saying, hey, Norwegians, do you know what the Swedes are doing? Swedes, do you know what the Finns are doing? And, you know, learn from each other and leverage projects and so on. So that is something that I hope we can take advantage of in the XR space. So, very briefly about the report. I'm not going to go into detail, but give a few highlights. And of course, always a good news, bad news, or not so good news story. The good news is the very impressive evolution that I found of XR ecosystems in the countries, and I'll go into some detail in the next few slides about that. Growing interest, and the cluster here is amazing. What is happening around here is really interesting, and it's unique in many ways. So I'll talk a little bit about that, especially here, there's private-public partnerships. That is somewhat unique. You don't see that as much over in my area. And strong academic research, and the Nordics, and particularly the Finns. The Finns have a reputation in education and learning. Why? Well, first of all, they're always on top of the PISA rankings. And of course, they laugh a little bit about that. Yeah, we know, but we're not really that good in technology and so on. But the Finns do innovate. They have been for years and years focused on innovation. I've done a number of projects for Tekes. Tekes is joined with FinPro and is now Industry Finland. And their budget have been cut a bit, but they're still doing amazing things. And they leverage the Finnish brand. But we, the rest of the Nordics and the Baltics, can hitch our wagons to the Finns and take advantage of that. So that's something we need to do. So if we look at Finland and the ecosystem around XR, and you'll find that both in Finland and Denmark, the ministries are active. I don't know if Paul left. I don't see Paul in front here, so he must have left. Paul Chaffee. It was great to hear, and I know Paul has been very active and is a great supporter and works with Nikolai Astrup. Nikolai, after he was appointed, the first thing he did was jump on an airplane and came out over to us. And we had dinner at the Norwegian consulate, and he spent a few days there talking to all the big tech companies and so on. And I think he's doing great work, but I have some comments about him and Paul in a later slide. But both Finland and Denmark have ministries involved. And in Finland, this was the first project for schools. This is the second one, more focused on both schools and universities, I think. If you're interested in this area, you should check out the Innokas network that led this project. And there's quite a bit of detail in my report about what they did, what they found, and so on. And of course, a bunch of other players, a number of universities have XR labs, and they're doing projects, mostly focused on research, not so much on deploying XR technology in the classroom and so on. That's where I want to see more action. That's the weakness. And Tekes, as I said, have funded a few things, been very active in Finland across a number of sectors, and they funded these two reports. One report that focused on who are the players, and what are they focusing on, what are they doing, and how many are focusing on 360 video, how many are focused on training and education and so on. So it's a good report that you might want to take a look at. And the second one, the mixed reality report, is more on devices and raising money and what is happening in the marketplace and so on. So Finland has a very robust, a large ecosystem. And Denmark is coming along. And what happened in early 2018, partly driven by Labster. I guess many of you know Labster, right? It's a very interesting Danish edtech company, the leading edtech company, particularly in doing, they have a very good lab simulations platform. So if you want to do lab work, you know, you can blow up all kinds of things and you could spend lots and lots of money to get this very sophisticated lab equipment that you could then ruin in the lab. So why not make virtual lab equipment? And that's what they have done. They sold that to universities around the world. They formed a partnership with Google and so on. And so they've been talking to the Ministry of Education and Science and got them to fund a big project that Roskilde University is leading. And that is interesting. And they're going to bring in other Danish universities. And so some very good things happening in Denmark at that level. And they're building a new center for virtual technology and the use in learning. So I would recommend the Norwegians, the Swedes, and the Finns try to team up with the Danes in terms of what they're doing there. And then in addition, E.ON, which of course is huge here, that you'll see in my next slide, had teamed up at VI University. I think there's some good Danes in the audience because they wrote me and said they're going to be here. So there are good things happening in Viborg and kind of building up a similar public-private partnership situation as you have here in Hamar. And I think that would be great. So there are definitely things happening in Denmark. And of course, I can go quickly over this because many of you already know this. You're here. Many of you will probably take the tour tomorrow. You'll visit some of these places. So E.ON is in the middle here. They came in late 2018, set up operations here. I had the great fortune of visiting Mats Johansson in Irvine in 2011. I did a project for the French oil company, Titel, and they sent me down there to find out what E.ON was doing. And I was very impressed by what I saw, particularly their big projects with large enterprises and doing very interesting things. So when I found out they would set up operations here, I was very happy to see that. It's a very interesting private-public partnership that you can see here. And of course, NTNU, Ekaterina is in the audience. She can fill you more in on what all the different projects that she's doing. That is described in my report, or at least many of her projects, but I'm sure she has new ones since I finished the report. And there are other players around in Norway, just like in Finland. Various universities are playing around, playing physically or, testing things out. Not so much deploying it in the actual teaching process. That I hope we'll see more on that front. But there are some things happening there. Now, so what are there are, of course, some bad news or some not so good news. First of all, there are relatively few XR-Edu deployments and use cases. We heard Fraunhofer, which is huge. My SRI, we think we're big, 2,000 people, the original think tank in the valley, but 127,000, wow. But of course, there are many, many Fraunhofers all around Germany and so on. And so SRI is small, but so the use cases we heard of there were interesting, and there are lots of them. But we need to have better, stronger use cases in education to find out what really works. What works the best, and where is a learning outcome really affected significantly? Those kinds of things are somewhat weak. And what does it cost? Jeremy Bailenson is a professor at Stanford who built a human virtual interaction lab at Stanford many, many years ago. He wrote a book, Experience on Demand, a few years ago. And he's one of the few that really got into the issues of cost. And he referred to something that Chris Dede, who's a professor at Harvard Graduate School of Education. I had Chris at a meeting I organized in Washington many years ago, and he's done some very interesting research. He's been in immersive for a long time. But Jeremy talked about the cost of creating some of those experiences that Chris developed. Very, very costly. And let's face it, schools typically don't have big budgets. That's why more things are happening in industry. And relatively little sharing our knowledge across, and we're risk averse, we know that, and that slows innovation and experimentation. And so there's a lot of testing, small tests, and it's fun to do, but we got work to do. We got to do more. We got to find out how learning outcomes are affected and how cost-effective they are. So in order to accelerate XR-Edu, in my humble opinion, is that we need to leverage lessons from early adopters in other sectors, including entertainment and industry, especially educate policymakers. So it's great that Paul was here, and then he can go back and tell Nikolai all the wonderful things that are happening here, and launch pilot studies, and find partners, and build ecosystems, and then build evangelist cores. We have to evangelize. And of course, that is what is happening here, but we need to do that in Oslo with the policymakers. And this thing shows kind of how you want to leverage the things that are happening in the other sectors. So in training, industry is really getting into this because they see immediate payoff. If they can train salespeople a little more quickly, that goes directly to the bottom line. And so there are all kinds of deployments, so AR, VR, that can be leveraged into education. Same from lifelong learning. I will say a little more about medical and museums in a few minutes, and of course, entertainment. So there's a complex dynamic there. In the report, one of the recommendations I made was, God, we have all this stuff happening. We got all these wonderful research labs in academia, but we need to leverage that stuff into deployment, an institute or lab, or just a group of people that focus on deployments and work with schools and universities to set up pilot projects and also works with industry and take advantage of best practices, lessons from other areas. We have Foundry 10 in Seattle. It's an amazing institute that had tested thousands of students around the US and Canada with XR technology. They participate a little bit in a Finnish project, but we could take advantage of what they have learned and when we design our pilots here. And that kind of institute could be connected to an XR-Edu forum where people who are interested in education and learning come together, once or twice a year and share experiences and knowledge. I also think that we can hook our wagons to the trains that already have left the station, that are moving on and are getting funding. And in the last month or two, I have ended up in a dialogue that involves people all over that is focused on smart, sustainable cities. One friend of mine, his company is headquartered in Ålesund, tells me that Ålesund is one of 2 cities among 1,000 cities in this UN project on smart, sustainable cities. Ålesund, because of the offshore technology, the visualization technology used offshore now being applied in Ålesund, and I think they're doing in Molde or Bodø, I think they're doing a smart city thing. They're smart cities everywhere. So we should take advantage of that and think about, renewable energy projects and try to involve students in those. I had a delegation from Oslo Smart City They came to me, and I presented to them, and I said, why don't you think of doing something a little different? Why don't you involve students in your project and have them design skate parks for the future city of Oslo, where they can enjoy what they love to do, but have them design the damn skate parks themselves, learn to use digital tools, bring industry in, and so on. And they said, oh, yeah, this is great. And then they went back. I haven't heard from them. You know, that's what I call techno-tourism. I don't know how many techno-tourism delegations I had in the Valley in the 40 years that I worked over there. It's amazing. They drink wine, they smell the air, they're going to be innovative, and then they go back. And so that's the way it goes. I think, you know, look regionally and globally, including the Valley, not just the Valley, to share best practices, leverage strengths, find synergies, and look for and explore joint projects. And I had 3 minutes, and I'm going to make it. I just have a few more slides. This one in particular, it talks about education and medical training. We already heard some things about that. There is so much going on. And this is just a small sample of the things that I have looked into a bit. And as you can see, I'm a little biased. There's more happening in California. And then this in particular, Western University of Health Science, probably most of you have never heard of this. Dr. Robert Hazel is an amazing guy who set up this thing. And his son picked up where his father left off, as now has a startup company at Stanford called TriPoint Lab, using XR technology to teach medical students and avoid students messing up cadavers and stuff like that. So Robert has done amazing things, including with adaptive learning. That's now going to take advantage of AI. So that's cool. And then in the Valley, here's Berkeley, here's Palo Alto, and what Jeremy is doing at Stanford. Santa Clara University has an amazing Imaginarium. So they're doing stuff in arts and sciences, and San Jose State University, where I played soccer many years ago, is doing things. So if you come over to the Valley, there are places you can go and visit and meet, you know, like-minded people who do research and do teaching. I think we should not ignore the more informal centers, and here are two. In the XR Marin, and you hopefully will get the slides of these so you can look at the detail that I'm skimming over, because I got 1 minute and 15 seconds left. So this is fascinating, more focused on adult teaching and learning and training and up here. And then you have this immersive learning center in Vallejo, and you can find out more information about that. We need to think about the challenges that face us, and the challenges depend on what hat you wear. We all wear different hats, so these are the hats. You know, are you a policymaker, are you an administrator, are you a professor, and so on. So think about that, and what is it that we have to do to make their jobs easier? For instance, I found in Finland even, there's not enough support for the teachers. They're still a bit afraid of the technology. This was meant for Paul. So Paul sits here with Nikolai, and but we have two ministers over here for K through 12 and higher ed and research. What kind of collaboration is there, and can Nikolai affect and help initiate good big things, big pilots that can explore how XR can be used in education and learning in the future? I think there's a huge opportunity for the Nordics and the Baltics, because we have a reputation in education and learning. I see it all the time over in the US. We can take advantage of that, but we need some bigger pilots. And then you could bring in the Oculus education. I was invited to a big Oculus education summit the other day, and they're interested in what's happening. They hear what we're doing here. So let's leverage and take advantage of it. And there, you can contact me. I'd love to be in touch and having a dialogue. This is Cal Viking, you know. Not, that's in my dream, that I'm a big Viking. So anyway, Hopefully gave you a little insight in, as I raced through some of this stuff. If you're interested in detail, download the report and get in contact. So thank you very much.